Okay, picking up with the female. We're going to finish her off. We're going to do the menstrual cycle, an odd and end. Now, I don't want to get into a big, long, drawn-out thing about the menstrual cycle here, but you need to know a little bit so you understand what's going on in the uterus. Let me use maybe yellow. Might be good. Okay. So notice that there are 3 time periods on this 28-day cycle. The menstrual cycle is 28 days, at least that's the generic cycle length. It can vary 25 one month, 28 another month, 31 another month, but we're going to go 28 days. Okay, 3 time periods. Okay, so here's day 1, here's day 28, 3 times. Time intervals: menstrual phase, proliferative phase, secretory phase. Now what you're looking at here on the picture is the changes in the uterine wall. This would be the endometrium. Increase in glandular development. You see glands here. Increase in blood vessels. You see them as red. And the thickening of the endometrium. And obviously that's occurring because there might be a little zygote that drops in there. Okay, so let's jump into the second part of this, which is right around day 6 to day 14. It's the proliferative phase. And what's driving this is hormones. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Estrogen and progesterone is driving this thickness of the endometrial layer. So the endometrial layer is becoming thicker, thicker, thicker. Okay, now we get over here to day 14. Remember also that estrogen is coming from the developing follicle. So here's the developing follicle right here. In fact, there's the Graafian follicle right there. And if you look at the one to the right, you notice this is ovulation. So at that point, we're at day 14. If you go down over here, day 14 is ovulation. And now the remaining follicle structure, which never leaves the ovary, it's just the egg that does, that follicle implodes, and it's now just putting out max hormones, estrogen plus progesterone. So it's the combination of those two that's now even driving the uterine lining even thicker. And that is called the secretory phase because you have max estrogen and testosterone. Now, what's going to happen is right around this period of time, right, whoops, got to get back. All right, so right here, if the egg has not been fertilized, we'll talk about that later, the corpus luteum, which has been putting out estrogen and progesterone, driving this increase in thickness, that corpus luteum degenerates, and it doesn't, oh, jeez. An iPad is very sensitive. Alright. So anyway, it degenerates and it stops making estrogen and testosterone and progesterone. And that happens at somewhere around day 26 or so. And now, without that corpus luteum, estrogen and progesterone drops off. And without those two hormones, the endometrium now is going to slough off because the blood vessels become constricted and there's not enough blood flow to the endometrium, and it basically dies and it peels off. It's the inner layer, and it just goes right out the vagina. So here you see the drop off of the endometrial lining due to estrogen and progesterone drops. And notice we're at day 28, so we start back again right over here at day 1. Here's the continuation of the menstrual flow. This is at the minimum estrogen and progesterone levels. And where the endometrium begins to grow again is right here when the follicles begin to mature with their eggs inside. You can see over on the left, two histology slides. The bottom one is showing you the max. That would be the secretory phase during the max thickness, and those ziggy-zaggy white areas in there are glands that are developing. Okay, moving along. Vagina. Not much else. Not much to say. Um, it stays collapsed unless there's something in there. It's very high glycogen. Remember, glycogen stored glucose. It some of that can be broken down and used by a zygote in the uterus. Unfortunately, it can also be used by microorganisms. Well, fortunately, actually, because most of the microorganisms in the vagina are beneficial, and they're using sugar from the glycogen. They're making acidity, and that acidity is really good for you because it keeps other potentially harmful organisms from growing well in that acidity. We're talking about like 3.5, 4. That's like maybe more acidic than yogurt even. Unfortunately, that acidity also kills some sperm, but that's life and death. Okay, anyway, the view that you're looking at over here at the top right is a diaphragm. Since we're in the vagina, I thought I'd show you that. It's what do you call it? A sponge would be kind of similar, except it's not the same material. It goes, though, in the same place, and it fits up at the top of the vagina. There's like a little recessed area around the bottom of the cervix, and the little lip of a diaphragm fits right there. So you've got a barrier between sperm and where they're trying to get. Good view of stratified squamous epithelium of the vagina that you see at the bottom right. The hymen is the cover right here over the entryway to the vagina that gets ripped at intercourse, and other things could do it. I mentioned this little recessed area. You can kind of see it right there where the lip of the diaphragm sits. And that little area actually has a name. It's called the fornix. Okay. So, wait a minute. I think okay. External genitalia, called the vulva. All of this right in here. Oops, wait a minute. Gotta get my little. No, my. There we are, in yellow. There we are. There's the vulva. Why I have a circle there, I don't know. Anyway, mons pubis is this thing right there. It's adipose tissue in the front. There's the symphysis pubis, which is where the two pubic parts of the bone come together. Labia majora, labia minora. By the way, labia majora is the exact same material that in the male develops into the scrotum. It's analogous. Hair follicles, sweat glands, all that stuff in the labia minora. Clitoris, I gotta get rid of all that stuff. Okay, right there. Erectile tissue, it's corpus cavernosum, just like in the penis. We'll talk more about it later. Prepuce, a little kind of a covering right over here, again comparable to the prepuce in the male. Prepuce is the hood. It's removed during circumcision in the male. Okay, glands. There's some little like purple glands, right? You see them right over here lining the urethral area, and you see some more right over here. Those are the Bartholin's glands. They're comparable to the Cowper's glands in the male. Again, it's a lubricant material for sex. Okay, so moving on. Mammary glands. I don't know why my picture. Let me get rid of that. I'm going to talk more about breast cancer in a real lecture, so I'm not going to get into it now. Okay, so you're looking at mammary glands, and a couple things you see over here. Notice here's the pectoral muscle right here in back of the mammary gland. In yellow, you've got adipose tissue right here. Actually, it's adipose tissue that determines the size of breast tissue. This picture right here you can see the muscle there, and you can see some fatty tissue, adipose tissue right there. And then you see this kind of a whitish area right over here. This is mammary gland material. On the picture, it's the purplish little sacs right over here. You see a duct system that carries the milk away. The areola is this thing right over here. It's like a modified sweat gland. And these glands are just called mammary glands, and the ducts are lactiferous ducts, and they all come together almost right below the nipple, and that's called the lactiferous sinus. And I think that's about all I want to go into. Okay, so you've seen something comparable to this in the male. Hormonal control, hypothalamus, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, targets pituitary. It makes FSH and LH. FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, exactly what it sounds like, oogenesis. LH is the hormone that causes ovulation. It peaks right around day 12. You'll see it when we look at the hormone variations. Again, both of them coming from the pituitary. The ovaries are making estrogen and progesterone. You saw this picture at the bottom in the male, again showing you how related estrogens, because there's many estrogens, by the way, and the testosterone variations. And over this big picture over here shows you, again in females, functions of FSH and LH. You might want to stop and look at that. Here's a look at before and after ovulation, showing you a positive feedback mechanism and a negative feedback mechanism. So over on the left, you've got, remember FSH and LH come from the anterior pituitary. There you are. I hate that little circle in the middle, but I don't know how to get rid of it. So we get a surge of FSH and LH, and again, it's the LH that is most involved in ovulation, and the combination of the two now positively feed back, and we get more. And remember that after ovulation, the follicle has collapsed. It's now the corpus luteum. It's going to make large amounts of estrogen and progesterone. So we've got this positive feedback mechanism that's making more and more FSH and LH. Now on the right, after ovulation, the corpus luteum is going to be making hormones. These hormones, again, are estrogen and progesterone. They feed back to the pituitary. Look at the negatives here. And they shut down LH and FSH. So remember that FSH and LH are involved in oogenesis. So basically when you're in that third time period of menstrual cycle and the egg has potentially been fertilized, or if it hasn't, it's going to die anyway in a day, you can't make any more eggs because FSH and LH goes down the tubes in the third section of the menstrual cycle. Again, you'll see what's going on there in a minute. Okay, so moving on, oogenesis and spermatogenesis comparison. We've already covered these. You can stop and look at them in more detail. Okay, so let's move over to the menstrual cycle. All right, there are three things happening here. One, changes in the uterine lining. I've already taken you through it. Two, changes in the ovary, the maturation of the follicles, oogenesis, production of secondary oocytes. Okay, two. Three, pituitary hormones, which then are going to direct ovarian hormones. All right, so reminder, here are the three steps of the menstrual cycle. Menstrual phase, sloughing off, right there. Estrogen and progesterone are at their bottom. Day 1 through 5. Day 6, here's day 6. We go to the proliferative phase. We start to get a proliferation, that's what it means, proliferation, thickening of the uterine lining. It's due to estrogen, I'm going to put an E here, being made by the developing follicle. We get to day 14 now. Day 14, ovulation, there we are. Now the follicle turns into the corpus luteum. It's now making estrogen plus progesterone during this last time period. Notice that this is the largest portion of the menstrual phase, right? Well, it's half of it anyway. We're now in the secretory phase. By the way, picture down here, corpus luteum. It looks like a collapsed follicle. It looks just like that guy right there. Okay, so top right you see the pituitary and how it's driving ovarian development, maturation of the eggs. Alright, you see FSH and LH. Remember, it's made early in the menstrual cycle. So FSH and LH, let me point out right here, I'm going to do FSH in green, I guess. Okay, so the FSH is already in black. So here's day 1 of the menstrual cycle. It goes up. Notice that it's high at the first time period of the menstrual cycle. That's the menstrual phase. It's driving the maturation of the follicles and the oogenesis right in that period of time. Then it's going to drop down, and we're going to have another little spike right here, right around the time of ovulation. It's helping LH with ovulation. And then, here's day 14, ovulation right there. And FSH bottoms out. Remember why. Look at estrogen, gold line. Look at progesterone, green line. When those two hormones come up, they have a negative effect, negative feedback on the pituitary. So estrogen and progesterone feed back to the pituitary and shut that down. That's why you see FSH going down. Now the black line above it is LH. So we start out, it doesn't really come up very much. You see it's kind of not very accurate. It stays low. They're just kind of pushing it up the graph so you can see it better. But we have our big spike right here. Again, somewhere around day 12, day 13. It's the main thing driving ovulation. So there's ovulation right there. And that's where LH is going to get involved. Again, it's actually spiking in level right before that. And then again, it drops down just like FSH does. Alright, now, as all this is happening, remember during follicle development going this way, here, in the first time period, estrogen is going to be made. Estrogen is a gold line. You see it starting to come up right here, again, right before ovulation. Then, after the ovulation, right here, you get kind of a downturn. Actually, it's happening right about at the same time. But now the corpus luteum starts spitting out estrogen and progesterone. Estrogen comes up again. Progesterone now, as you can see, is the main guy coming up. These cycles start at a time period called menarche. That happens around puberty. And they end at menopause, which is generally somewhere around 50. And menarche is somewhere around 12, obviously. Okay, I like this because it puts everything excuse me, together. So we've got what's going on in the ovaries up here. I'm going to draw a green line here for ovulation right there. So remember, ovulation is the dividing line between the proliferative phase, which on this chart they call the follicular phase, because it's also called the follicular phase because the follicles are developing. You can see that happening up here. Follicular phase because of what's going on in the ovaries, and proliferative phase because of what's going on in the uterus. And on the other side of it is what is called luteal phase, because the corpus luteum is making hormones. It's also called the secretory phase because of the hormones. Alright, so anyway, you see a temperature difference, which I think is kind of interesting to look at, because one of the ways you can determine when you're ovulating, in case you want to get pregnant, is by a big change in temperature of a, well, not a big, it's like a degree and a half. Okay, then you can see, get rid of all these guys, you can see the pituitary hormones in green and blue, LHFSH, again, highest right around ovulation and a little bit before in the case of FSH. Then you've got estrogen and progesterone in gold and purple, so you can see everything nicely laid out there. Stop here if you want to look at it more. Okay, odd and end other things. Since we're on birth control, well, no, actually we've kind of talked a little bit about it, haven't we? Yeah, we did. Sponges and things. Okay, so let's get back over to that. A view that you see right over here, we're going to talk about a monthly calendar in a minute. A nice view of an egg with a sperm. The egg is over 200 times bigger than a sperm. That's a real picture. Okay, I'm going to get back into birth control pills when I get that picture of a calendar up, because you need to be able to see the days. But let me point out this picture over here of the uterus. You're looking at the inside of a uterus on the far left, and there's an object in there. It's called an IUD, not an EID. That's an explosive device in Afghanistan. Intrauterine device. It's actually put inside the uterus. It's got a little tie thing that you could use it to pull it out. Doctors have to put it in. It basically sets up a low-level inflammation of the endometrium, and if an egg does happen to get fertilized, it will not implant. Now, that means that that's an abortive device because fertilization's already occurred. When we get to the birth control pills are not abortive devices. They are pre-fertilization birth control agents. Keep it in mind. A lot of people don't know that. Okay, so problems. I'm going to talk about this more in lecture. I think I will just skip over all that. Okay, so we haven't talked about this before. Male, female, sexual intercourse. Not going to get into all this. You cover this way more in psychology, I think. Erection, emission, ejaculation in the male. Just real fleetingly. Vasodilation in the penis. You see this over on the right-hand side. Cross-section. Already took you through this. There are some large arteries right over here. They don't have it on here, but there's also some more large arteries right in here. Remember, these two big columns are the corpus cavernosum columns, or corpora cavernosa. These large arteries dilate, more blood flow comes in, causes the erectile tissue to swell with blood, so the whole thing becomes enlarged right here, okay? And the whole thing increases in diameter, as you can see. And that is going to do something. It's going to close off these veins. The veins, it's like stepping on a hose. And so you got more blood coming in, and you have less blood going out, and that's erection. Um, then we're going to move the sperm out. Obviously, the penis has got to be put somewhere in the vagina. Well, because it has to be put anywhere. But anyway, let's assume it is. That's why you need the erection, to get in all the way into the vagina. The emission is going to be the movement of the sperm from the epididymis, where they're hanging above the testis, along the vas deferens. They merge with the seminal vesicle duct, and the secretion from that duct mixes in. That's the main part of semen. And then that semen moves to the urethra. Remember, vas deferens goes through the prostate gland as the ejaculatory duct, and it dead ends in the urethra. So now we got the semen sitting there. It's mixed in with prostatic fluid and seminal vesicle fluid. And now we are going to have skeletal muscle contraction in the bottom of the pelvis of the male, and that then squeezes in on that urethra, and those babies go out. In females, you've got an erection, albeit not that much, caused by, again, the same process of vasodilation in the male. This requires a combination of both parasympathetic and sympathetic autonomic nervous systems working together, which is not all that common. Usually they're balanced against each other. Okay, so here's a better look. Stimulus. Bunch of neurotransmitters involved, by the way. Oxytocin and dopamine and nitric oxide. I'm going to talk about nitric oxide more, because that's going to take us to Viagra. Sacral nerves involved, bottom of the spinal cord almost. Remember, sympathetic stimulation carried by those guys. More nitric oxide. GMP, a close cousin of ATP involved. That's going to give us smooth muscle relaxation of the penile arteries. Again, dilation. More blood flow coming in. And boom, we get an erection. Okay, so now we're in emission again. We have movement of the sperm from the epididymis up along the vas deferens. By the way, they're not moving on their own. It's smooth muscle contraction. The vas deferens walls got a lot of smooth muscle. The sperm are not modal to the extent they can move on their own through there that quickly anyway. Okay, so you see other neurotransmitters now involved. Sympathetic nerves, so again, each one of the two autonomic nervous systems is a little bit different thing here. More norepinephrine. Smooth muscle contraction of the vas deferens, again, for emission. And then skeletal muscles, ejaculation. And here are our two last things. And again, another look, different way to see it. Up at the top left, good view of a cross-section of the penis, not engorged with blood. Bottom, engorged with blood. By the way, remember that this guy down here is the corpus spongiosum. He's not really all that important in erection. The claim to fame of that corpus spongiosum is he's got a urethra right there. So he's not all that terribly important to this process anyway. You can stay here if you want. I'm going to go on. Notice how important pressure is in the erectile tissue. So pressure increase in that area. Alright, so here is our 28-day cycle. Let me point out some things we've talked about already. Menstrual phase, first 5 days in black. Then here we go from the menstrual phase to the proliferative phase, or sometimes called the follicular phase. The letters are in blue. Then we have ovulation right here. we move into the secretory or luteal phase, and it's in green. And again, you can see that's half the month. Now, okay, let's talk about day 14 here. The egg will only live, if it's not fertilized, 1 day. That's it. 1 day. 1 day, 1 day, 1 day. So, fertilization either has to occur here, when it pops out of the ovary, or it's got to occur here. That's it. If the sperm don't get in there till day 17, nothing's going to happen. They're not there. I mean, the egg's not there. Okay, now, let's go backward in time, because remember, sperm live 3 days. So if the sperm are deposited here, the egg comes along the next day, boom, no problem. Let's go back another day. We're now at 48 hours before. Sperm can stay alive for 48 hours, albeit some of them are going to start dying. But again, we can still make it, they can still make it to the egg on the 14th. Okay, let's go back another day, because here's 3 days before, and there's still going to be a bunch of them alive right over there. So, if you were going to look at the time period when, if you were trying to get pregnant, you'd want to have intercourse, it would be, let me change the color here to red. It would be from the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, right? That's the time of greatest fertility. Now, let's add another day just for safety. In fact, let's go the other way. Let's say you don't want to get pregnant. So definitely you don't want to have sex unprotected anyway during those days. And let's even pad it by another day, because you'd want to be really careful if you don't want to get pregnant. Let's add a day here. Let's add a day here. So you can see we have a 1 week period when you want to avoid sperm getting to an egg, because they're going to be there together. That's the time period of greatest fertility. Now, I talked about birth control pills before I mentioned them, so let me point them out. Birth control packet. You can get them for 3 weeks, 21 days. You can get them for 28 days. If you get a 28-day packet, it's just a week of placebo. It's for people that can't keep count of taking pills. All right, now you start to take a birth control packet right around here. Here's BC pills. Okay. So you take them, and 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 we're now going to be somewhere, at about right here. When you start taking them, your levels of estrogen and progesterone skyrocket. And remember that the follicle is, or follicles are maturing. We change color for green during this period of time, right? So if you go way up fast on BC pills, which are estrogen and progesterone generally, or you can get them progesterone by themselves, or you can get estrogen by themselves, you get a negative feedback mechanism that stops FSH and LH from being produced. In other words, turns pituitary off. None of that. So in other words, you get no egg maturation and no release of eggs with birth control pills. That's why I said these are not abortive devices. You're actually preventing the eggs from developing. You stop it right here. You go off of them, and your your estrogen progesterone level drops just as it would in a regular cycle. So now you're kind of in a regular cycle, and you go into a downturn of the endometrium, and it sloughs off, and that continues over here, and boom, now you start to take the pills again for the next month, and you can see what happens. Okay, so that's BC pills. Okay, so to finish all this off, this picture comes out of your, I think, out of your textbook, and it shows something I've already mentioned. You've got a male, in case you can't see it, there's a male over on this side, and there's a female over on this side, and they're trying to show you that it's the same tissue that develops along the same lines into external genitalia. So here is the development of the penis, and here's the development of the clitoris. Again, they're both the same erectile tissue for the most part. Then you can see the, right in here, the folds that will be the the that'll develop into the scrotum around the testes. You see it better right there. And in the female, those become the labia majora folds. The gonads develop sometime around week 5, start to develop. We get spermatogonia and oogonia at 7 to 8 weeks. External genitalia at about 8 weeks. Again, that's why you can see what the sex is on ultrasound. We've talked about menopause a little bit. When a female gets to menopause, by that time, all of her eggs are dead. Dead eggs, no estrogen, no progesterone, bottoms out, never to be made again, unless you're just going to take hormone therapy. Male climacteric thought that there is something comparable to menopause in males. Some people believe it, some not. Maybe in the 50s, they go through a change in testosterone production, although males can father babies for a long time. Okay, that's it.